Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. We're going to begin today by hearing further evidence from Mr. Peter Groves of the LFB. So could I ask, please, Mr. Groves to be brought back in? Good morning, Mr. Groves.
Good morning. Morning.
Ready to carry on?
I am indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, when you're ready, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks, sir. Good morning, Mr. Groves.
Morning.
Yesterday afternoon, when we broke, we were discussing communications, and that's a topic to which I'd like to return this morning. Now, we have a copy of a station-based radio equipment training package at LFB 001222846. Excuse me. There we go. And if we can turn to page 2, we can see the 4 objectives of this station-based training session are set out there. Namely, list the range of radio equipment used operationally within the LFB, describe the function of the radio equipment, select radio equipment appropriate for use in operational scenarios, demonstrate the assembly and use of BARIE, that's B-A-R-I-E, radio equipment. The package then goes on to describe key items of communications equipment. And for example, can we turn to page 14? Where it describes BARIE equipment. If we go to page 20, there is a description of radio repeater capability. And if we turn over to page 21, it sets out the availability of repeaters, but that is the totality of the guidance and advice given on the topic of radio repeaters. I've only taken you to a number of those slides, but if you'd like to see more of them, please say so. But would you accept, on the basis of your previous knowledge and what I've shown you this morning, that the package contained only a basic description of the LFB's communications equipment?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
What it doesn't do is instruct crews about the difficulties that may be encountered in relation to communications when fighting fires in high-rise buildings. Would that be something you also accept?
Based on what I've seen, yes.
And indeed, those were the problems that had in fact been encountered at Lacknell. Would you agree with that?
I agree.
And so the package itself doesn't meet or address the communications issues that are experienced at Lacknell. Is that a fair proposition?
I think that's fair.
Thank you. And would you accept that this package also does not provide guidance or teach crews about wholesale loss of communications and what to do when faced with that eventuality? Would you agree with that?
I'd agree with that based on what I've seen, yes.
Can we turn now to the senior officer package, which can be found at LFB 001222844? And if we can turn to page 3, we should see the objectives of the package, which are again fourfold. First, to describe the functions and use of the analogue handheld radio, radio repeater, and digital main scheme radio. Secondly, describe situations where inter-agency voice communications and procedures can be used and how it would be implemented. Thirdly, identify and find solutions for radio communication issues. And finally, apply your knowledge of how radio equipment can be used to an exercise scenario. Now, if I can give you a flavour of the slides again, first of all, if we could turn to page 23. If that could be expanded, we see here a slide which says, under the heading Communication Issues and Solutions, text which says this: large and complex buildings or underground structures may adversely affect radio communications. Would you accept that that is not an adequate or complete way of instructing senior officers about the way in which high-rise materials such as concrete and metal can disrupt radio signals, for example?
It doesn't specifically say that, so I agree with you.
If we can go on and look at a number of other slides, can we go back and in the slideshow to page 17? And here we go. Here we have rather an explanation of the functionality of a repeater and leaky feeders. I'll just let you read the text. Would you accept there's no distinction made there between radio repeaters and telemetry repeaters?
I'd accept that, yes.
And so on the basis of this package, would you accept that there was a failure to train senior officers at least on that important distinction?
Yep. Based on what you showed me, yes, I agree with that.
Can we go to a separate document now, which is a witness statement of Greg Ashman? His statement can be found at LFB 00102269. And if we can turn to page 3 and paragraph 12. What he says there, I should say Greg Ashman, I'm assuming is a name known to you. He's an employee of the LFB.
Yeah, he's known to me, yes.
Did you have many dealings with him during your time as head of training?
Very limited.
What he says in paragraph 12 is this. In a number of witness statements provided by LFB personnel to the MPS, that's the Metropolitan Police Service, the assertion is made that radio repeaters were deployed at the Grenfell Tower fire. However, there is no evidence which the LFB has been able to derive from the CCTV review to substantiate these assertions. The personnel who provided these statements have mistaken telemetry repeaters for radio repeaters. Now, my question is a short one. Was it those events and the subsequent discovery that TCAP 0039 had not been delivered to staff before the fire that resulted in the delivery of radio-related training packages to staff in February 2019?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I don't know.
Do you know who would be able to answer that question?
Potentially would be the head of ops policy. I believe you'll see Mr. Cowop at some point.
Another one for Mr. Cowop.
Yes.
And I think I'm right in saying he would have been in post in February 2019.
Yes. Yes.
Now, in light of that answer, I've come to a swifter end to my prepared questions than I'd anticipated, for which apologies. In those circumstances, sir, might I have the usual 10 minutes to review the state of play, see if there are any further matters?
Yes. Well, Mr. Groves, I'm sorry we brought you in just for 10 minutes worth of questioning.
It's okay.
Could possibly have done that yesterday, but we didn't know, of course.
Well, it may be more. Of course.
There may be more questions. But anyway, here you are, and Mr. Kinnear has been very economical, and so have you. So we've reached the point at which we would normally have a short break so that Mr. Kinnear can check that he has actually asked you all the questions that he should have asked you, and to enable others who aren't present here in the room to suggest further questions should be put to you. Do you think 10 minutes is enough, Mr. Kinnear?
I think so.
All right. Well, what we'll do then, we'll break for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 20 past 10, and we'll see then whether there are any more questions that we need to ask you. And in the meantime, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence.
Okay.
So if you'd like to go with the usher, she'll look after you.
Thank you.
Right, so Mr. Kinnear, well, we'll say 20 past. If it turns out that you need more time, someone can send us a message.
Thanks, sir.
All right? Thank you very much. 20 past 10. Yes, would you ask Mr. Groves to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Groves. Well, I'm sorry we kept you waiting a bit longer than I suggested, but we are now ready to find out whether there are more questions for you.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
A few further questions for you, Mr. Groves. In evidence yesterday, we discussed the nature of LFB's relationship with Babcock, and you mentioned that whilst initially Babcock had been proactive, they later became passive. Now, can I discuss with you, first of all, what was their extent of their initial proactivity, and how did it manifest itself?
So at the start of the contract, as I explained yesterday, that you were going from a position where there was no training provider to them coming in and having to produce their own training resource model, their own trainers, their own venues, utilising LFB equipment. So they were very proactive within the first year to half year in the sense of getting themselves mobilised. The design function took slightly longer to take place, and I think there was a period where things became very sort of client and contractor relationship, and so things were not moving as swiftly as both parties would have liked.
Now, you referred to, in evidence yesterday, to encouraging Babcock to deal more proactively and positively to knockbacks they received.
Yes.
Can you give the panel an idea of the type of knockbacks that Babcock received, presumably from the LFB you're talking about?
Yes, I mean, one that comes to mind is around the use of driver simulators. So the Babcock have invested quite a bit of time and effort in designing a driving simulator approach, and had invested quite a bit of money in developing these simulators. The LFB was not keen, the commissioning department was not keen on sole use of simulators. Understandably, what they wanted was a theoretical input, a practical input, and simulated evidence. Babcock, I think, I was going to say rolled over, perhaps that's not the right terminology to use, but let's just say that they accepted the LFB's position a bit too quickly, and I think that they should have pushed back against that.
And were there a number of other instances where that dynamic was manifested?
No, because I think after that they became quite reactive rather than proactive. Towards the end of my time with the LFB, we had spoken to them about using virtual reality training more, and at the point that I was leaving, they were being far more proactive in the world of using alternative training methodologies.
One point which has been raised is it's really the question, what importance do you, i.e. the training department, place on simulation training given the LFB's frontline service nature?
I think simulated training is really important, but it's not the most important type of training. In effect, for each training solution that you look at, you should look at on three different levels. One would be is what's the theoretical input, and invariably you would do that via means of a computer-based training solution. From there, you would then look to see how can we simulate that, and so to enable people to use the knowledge that they've acquired and put that in a safe environment, and then ultimately put them into a real life situation where they can practice the theory and what they've done in the simulated environment.
Thank you. Also in evidence, you referred to numerous conversations with the Babcock contract director.
Yes.
To make processes work better and more efficiently. Who was the contract director with whom you were having discussions?
Okay, there were actually three up to the time of the incident. So there was David Ornger, Mark Metcalf, and Tony McHugh.
Thank you. Can I turn now to other aspects of training. And in your report on incident management dated July 2013, and we don't need to go to it unless you'd like to see it, it states that since there are now fewer fire incidents, there is less opportunity to undertake incident command roles, just flowing on from the types of training that's useful. So incident management training is important to ensure individual officers maintain skills in that particular area. Now, the question is, why was the corollary not that more in-person, i.e. practical training, was therefore required?
Yes, I think that's something that's, I think that's a fair question, and I think subsequently that's where the LFB moved to a position where they moved more practical element within the incident command exercise, and that's certainly incident command courses, and that's certainly what they've done in the latest suite of training.
Thank you. Now, in meeting minutes of the Operational Directorates Coordination Board on the 16th of June 2015, and this is something we looked at yesterday, it states that under the 10th of March 2014 action point this, ICT need to improve links to stations for video, as there is inconsistency in performance. There is no budget for improvements. The key question here is, did a lack of funds hamper effectiveness of training?
I wouldn't say in that situation. I think what was more the problem was around governance.
You mean by that what?
So funds were available, but they weren't always necessarily available within the training budget. So there might be need to request additional budgets from like a transformation budget. Also, if you were looking to increase the training budget and it was over a certain figure, 150k, you had to go to the Deputy Mayor for approval. So funds were there, but they weren't always easily accessible.
Thank you. Now, again, we don't need to go to it unless you would be grateful or need that assistance. In your second witness statement to the inquiry, you discussed the pilot process associated with TCAP 0124, and that was, for people listening, enhanced incident command training following LACNOR recommendations. Mm-hmm. The pilot was delivered on a number of occasions between 2014 and 2016, as we discussed yesterday, in existing training courses. And Brigade and Babcock representatives attended those courses and provided feedback. Now, in those feedback forms, one issue is consistently mentioned, is that it wasn't clear what the training was trying to achieve. Was that, first of all, a concern which you shared? If so, what was done to address that concern?
I have no recollection of that, I'm afraid.
If we go to LFB 0010 quadruple 2, and there's 5 forms here. I don't know whether you want to, if we can just scan through them at a pace that allows you to read them. We turn over the page. And turn over the page, please. If you indicate, do you want to turn over the page again?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to look at a specific comment?
No. Well, it's a general comment. If you have no recollection of the concern, if we can go back a page, skipped too quickly. And you see the sort of general comments. You see box 4, detail and content of the information supplied. It might be thought that the overall point that was being made was that it wasn't clear what the training was trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. Having briefly refresh your memory, do you have any recollections of that being a pronounced concern or a concern that prompted further discussion at the time when you reviewed the feedback forms?
That I don't recall this being brought to my attention, no.
And you don't remember any further discussions on that?
No, I don't.
I turn to one final matter, and that is the People's Services Review, which was carried out in 2017, I think I'm right in saying. We can go to the document LFB 000-83845/27. I'm trying to find, because we haven't been given the assistance of a precise reference, but the relevant extract is that what it says is the Babcock contract is effectively delivering a central training programme, particularly in volume of attendance, but it queried whether training assurance capability, as its staff are professional and skilled to judge the generic quality of training and work effectively, to hold the training provider to the right standards of facilities and trainer delivery. However, because they are not subject matter experts, they're not always best placed to judge the content of some operational courses. This is something that will need to be resolved moving forwards to genuinely assure the quality of what the external training provider is delivering. Now, that's at the bottom of that page. The question is this, that it would appear that in this People's Service Review, which I think was carried out between April and December 2017, appears to be the first time that these issues had been understood. Is that a fair observation?
No, that's not a fair observation. There were budget growth bids put in previously to increase the size of the team, and an explanation that ideally what you would like is a subject matter expert in each of the training curricular areas.
Thank you. Mr. Groves, that is it. I'm pleased to say. I hope it's probably better to deal with these matters this morning rather than 4:30 yesterday evening, so I ask for your forgiveness and indulgence in that regard and that of the panel. But the final thing I'd like to say is thank you very much for attending to give evidence, and it's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Groves, well, it's right that I should thank you on behalf of all the members of the panel for coming here to give your evidence. It's been really useful to hear what you have to tell us, and so we're very grateful. And now it's all over, you can go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kinnear. Now, the next witness was originally asked to be available to give evidence tomorrow, but I'm pleased to say that she's available today. She may not be actually here at the moment, but she is going to be able to start giving her evidence a little bit later this morning. I think the best course, because we need to do a little bit of housekeeping in any event, don't we?
We do.
Perhaps would be to have a bit of a break now and come back, say, at 11:15, by which time I think the witness will be here, will have had a chance to settle in, and then we can take her evidence.
The witness is here.
Oh, good.
But 11:15 probably gives enough time for her to settle down for people to
Yes.
make necessary arrangements
Yes.
for the next witness.
Right, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Well, with that in mind, then we'll break now and we'll resume at 11:15.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett. Now, we have another witness.
We do, Mr. Chairman. I now call Miss Rita Dexter, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Dexter. You're going to affirm, I understand. Is that right? Yes. Well, then the words should appear. Oh, right. You've been given a hard copy. That's fine. Could you read them out, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, do sit down. Make yourself comfortable. There's some water there if you would like it. And right, when you're ready then. Yes, Mr. Millett?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ms. Dexter, can I begin by thanking you very much for attending the inquiry today and for the next day also to help us with your evidence. We're very grateful to you. My questions are intended to be short and simple. Sometimes they are anything but. And so if you don't understand the question or you'd like me to repeat it, then I can do that, or I can put the question in a different way. We are going to take scheduled breaks, but if you feel you need a break at any other time, then please just signal and we can take a break. I should also ask you please to keep your voice up nice and clear so that those to your right can get down on the transcript very clearly what you're saying. Also, please don't nod or shake your head, a yes or no. It has to be, because otherwise it won't get recorded. Now, you've provided 2 witness statements to the inquiry. You'll find them on the desk in front of you in hard copy form, but they will also appear on the screen in front of you so that others can see the contents of those statements, and so will the documents to which we're going to go together. Now, your first witness statement was dated the 25th of January 2019, and if you go please to that, it's at LFB 3032363. Is that your first witness statement of that date?
Yes, it is.
And can you please go to page 15? There's a signature there. Is that your signature?
It is.
And at page 16, we could just pick up the date of the 8th of February 2019 there. Now, can we please look at the second witness statement at LFB 3040773? Is that your second witness statement of the 11th of March 2019?
It is.
And again, we see a signature under the statement of truth there. Is that your signature?
It is.
And there is an exhibit, RMD 9, to that witness statement. I'll show it to you. That is at LFB 3040774. Can we please have that up? That is a 25-page submission that you made, is this right, unsolicited, to the Grenfell Tower Inquiry on the 15th of November 2017.
That's correct.
And it was in respect of the inquiry's terms of reference, yes?
Yes. I made a submission in response to the request for submissions in respect of the terms of reference for the inquiry, yes. And I think I subsequently made a further submission, which was once the terms of reference had been established.
And is that this submission?
I think this is the latter rather than the former.
Yes, I see. Do you recognise it as your own?
Yes.
Yes. Have you read your witness statements and this November 2017 submission recently?
Yes.
Can you confirm that the contents of your statements and this November 2017 submission are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
And are you happy for them to stand all as your written evidence to the inquiry?
I am.
Now, your statements have a number of documents exhibited to them in addition to this RMD 9. Can I ask you, have you recently reviewed those exhibits?
I have.
You have. And have you discussed your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
With my legal team.
Right. Now, just by way of foretaste, I should just tell you in a very broad outline the topics that we're going to consider together. The first is your professional background. Then we'll look at the role you performed at the LFB. And then we'll be looking in detail at the Operational Directorates Coordination Board, or the ODCB, and in particular the DIOT, or DIOT, steps. And then we'll move on to fire safety as a general topic and look at some detail about that and the Lakanal House Working Group in particular. Now, can I start then with the first of those topics, which is the professional background that you have? In your witness statement, you say, if we can go to LFB 3032363, this is your first statement, you say, if we go to page 2, please, paragraph 5, there, that before joining the LFB in 2001, you say, I was Deputy Chief Executive of a London Borough Council. Was that Barnet?
Yes.
And you joined the LFB in 2001 as Director of Corporate Services, I think.
I did.
Yes. Now, other than the role of Deputy Commissioner, did you ever occupy any other role within the LFB?
Director of Corporate Services.
Yeah, other than that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was first Director of Corporate Services and subsequently Deputy Commissioner.
Right, so you went straight from one to the other?
Yes.
And I think you were appointed to the role of Deputy Commissioner on the 10th of November 2009.
That's correct.
And is it right that you held that position until the 31st of March 2015?
Yes.
And at that time you were made redundant, I think?
That's correct, yes.
Yes. Now, you say at paragraph 5 of your statement, which is on the screen in front of you, in the 5th line, that you were the first non-operational Deputy Commissioner of the LFB. Now, by that, do you mean that you didn't have any previous firefighting experience?
I do.
Now, in your 2017 submission, if we just turn that up, please, LFB 3040774, can we please look at the first paragraph on page 1 of that? You say there, in the last 3 lines, I was appointed for my strategic management strengths and in the light of my experience outside the fire service, which was expected to enhance performance within the brigade because I would bring new experience and perspectives. What new experience and perspectives did the brigade want you to bring to the role?
Specifically, I think working with outside bodies. So, for example, the London boroughs. So, a great deal of what the fire service in London needs to achieve is the product of working with others. So, the London boroughs, the Care Quality Commission, and others. Members were also members, as in elected members. So, my appointment was as the result of a process led and determined by elected members of the authority, but members wanted to see, I think one of them described it as an intelligence-led approach. So during my time in London Fire Brigade, there was an increasing emphasis on the importance of information and the use of that information in order to improve performance. So those are 2 examples that immediately come to mind, but I guess also possibly my wider management experience. So, the fact of not having spent all of my career in the fire service, but having worked first in Birmingham City Council, then in the Department of the Environment, and then in Barnet Council, the experience which I'd gained in those organisations and the roles that I'd held were regarded as a strength and as providing me with experience which would be beneficial to the work of the brigade.
And in what ways were you expected to, as you say here, enhance the performance within the brigade? Just in brief.
Well, for example, in respect of community safety, to increase the time spent on community fire safety activity as undertaken at fire stations but also to improve the range and quality of relationships with outside bodies. I've already mentioned that the Care Quality Commission, but there were others too, to improve our performance, as it were, by reference to individual incidents. So in the case of individual fire deaths in domestic dwellings where elderly or vulnerable people were involved, I think one of the things that I very specifically did was introduce measures and strategies for addressing those events in a more focused and forceful way, and in particular feeding that back to the boroughs and care providers. So instead of, as it were, incidents being treated individually, we began to bring together, as it were, pictures or trends based on individual incidents, including the fire deaths of elderly people, and learn and implement some strategic lessons as a result of those.
When you joined the LFB in 2001, having joined, did you become aware of the particular problem or problems that you had been appointed to solve? Was there a particular problem that your appointment was supposed to address?
No, I wouldn't say that was the case. When I joined in 2001, it was a new structure. So it wasn't the case that I was taking over the role from somebody else, for example, who might have been thought to have, for example, underperformed. That's not what was happening. It was an entirely new structure with a rearrangement of functions within the brigade. But I think what members did want to do was to give more importance to strategy and planning, which was one of the departments for which I was responsible, and communication. So I think they wanted to see what they might have described as a step change in performance, but it wasn't to remedy, as it were, known defects.
And when you were appointed Deputy Commissioner in November 2009, again, was there a particular problem that you were appointed into that role to solve?
No.
Right. Turning to that, when you were appointed into that role in November 2009, did you receive any handover?
I don't recall a specific handover, but I'd worked closely with the Deputy Commissioner who'd preceded me, but no, I don't recall a handover as such, no.
And just for our benefit, who was that?
It was Mr. Roy Bishop.
Now, if we go to your first witness statement, please, LFB 3032363, page 2, paragraph 5, you say there in the 7th line that you had relevant fire service experience based on your role as Director of Corporate Services within the LFB since 2001. How did that prepare you for the role of Deputy Commissioner?
Well, obviously I had knowledge of the structure of the brigade, so the building blocks of the brigade. I had knowledge and experience of the political management arrangements for the brigade, which was always very important. I had become aware of the priorities of the service, and I had, with my teams, led on the production of what was known as the London Safety Plan for a number of years. So the London Safety Plan was the Brigade's integrated risk management plan, and the statutory requirement to produce an integrated risk management plan, I think, came in 2005. And an integrated risk management plan was regarded as a key strategic planning document for all brigades, which set out what it wanted to achieve, the levels of service that it would provide. It was a replacement for old nationally prescribed standards. So for the first time, we were allowed to determine our own arrangements for response in terms of the arrangements of fire stations, fire engines. So all of that was part of the integrated risk management plan, and I and the departments for which I was at that time directly responsible were responsible for that plan. So that was the key document for London Fire Brigade, as it would have been in other brigades in the country as well.
Right. Now, as Deputy Commissioner, you were, is this right, one of the LFB's 3 directors?
4. Oh, sorry, excluding the Commissioner.
Excluding the Commissioner,
yes,
sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Yes. And that was, is this right, alongside the Director of Operations, Resilience and Training,
Yes.
who until 2015, I think also was Gary Reason.
Initially Gary Dobson, but subsequently Gary Reason.
And secondly, the Director of Finance and Contractual Services, who I think was Sue Budden.
Yes.
Yes. And as Deputy Commissioner, you held the additional responsibility of deputising for the Commissioner,
That's correct.
who I think all through your time was Ron Dobson.
That's correct.
Yes. Were there any other ways in which your role differed from the other directors' roles? I mean, quite apart from the supervision of the departments, which were obviously different. But as director reporting to the Commissioner, did you all have the same reporting responsibilities?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Now, is it right that your directorate, the Deputy Commissioner's directorate, included, at the very least, the following departments? And I'll give you 5, or 4, sorry. First, the Fire Safety Regulation Department.
Yes,
And that became later known, I think, as the Fire Safety Department.
maybe.
You say maybe. Is that after your time?
Possibly.
Right.
Yes.
Just to be clear, is it right that within the Fire Safety Regulation Department during your time, the enforcement obligations sat
Yes.
under the RRO?
Yes.
And that was Andy Jack, at least for some of it.
I don't know that I personally would have attached Andy Jack's name to that,
Right.
but certainly Andy Jack, yes, was involved in those activities.
Yes.
Yes.
Secondly, the Operations Prevention and Response Department.
Yes.
Thirdly, the Strategy and Performance Department.
Yes.
Fourthly, the Communications Department.
Yes.
Are there any significant departments for which you were responsible that I've omitted from that list?
Yes. Legal and Democratic Services.
Yes, very well. Are you able to give us a brief overview of the Strategy and Performance Department's remit?
Yes, so it matured over time. So it was a department that I was responsible for when I joined in 2001. I suppose focusing on 2009 rather than earlier, it was the department that was principally involved in the London Safety Plan, or the Integrated Risk Management Plan, as I've just described it. It was responsible for oversight of the Brigade's risk management plan. That was different to the Integrated Risk Management Plan. In the early years, there was some work to be done on defining the division between those two things, but that was about the corporate risks of the Brigade as a whole. So, you know, it might include things which were of no relevance to the IRMP, but which were relevant to the effective functioning of the Brigade.
Just pausing there. When you say the LFB's risk management plan, do you
Yes.
mean the Brigade's internal risk management plan relating to risks to itself,
Yes. So
as opposed to risks to premises for which it was responsible, or
Yes.
either as an enforcement
yes, that would be
body?
one way of characterising
Yes,
it.
I see.
Yes. So risk management planning. It was responsible for performance reviews. So in my early years, there was a statutory requirement to undertake a rolling programme of what were then known as best value reviews. But when, I can't remember whether best value as a legal concept came to be abolished by the government, but it was over time replaced by a different scheme of performance review arrangements, some of which from time to time involved inspections by the Audit Commission, but probably by the time I'd left were more, as it came to be described, sector-led rather than led by an external body like the Audit Commission. What else? Oh, sorry. A major function of the Strategy and Planning Department was the Information Management Division. So they were responsible for the production of our information strategy and also for the design and maintenance of a number of key information management systems. So I haven't listened to all of Peter Grove's evidence in the last few days, but I'd be surprised if he hadn't referred, for example, to STEP as a system that recorded information about the training undertaken by individuals within the organisation. And so the design and maintenance and integration of systems like STEP, we had something called STARS, and numerous other systems, too many for me to readily recall. They were, as it were, designed and maintained within that division, within strategy and planning. Sorry, there was also the predetermined attendance team. So that was the team that oversaw the policy and maintenance of the arrangements for determining which appliances would be dispatched to which address. That was all done via a system known as predetermined attendance. And I have a horrible feeling I'm overlooking a key team, but for the moment I can't drag their name to the front of my memory. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you very much. Now, looking at a different department, Operations, Prevention and Response, which also fell within your directorate, am I right that that department's remit was local stations and the control room, or rooms?
Yes, but also for community fire safety policy and delivery. There were numerous programmes associated with the community fire safety objectives of the brigade, home fire safety visits. So the team didn't carry out the home fire safety visits, but they were responsible for, as it were, the policy that determined how and where they would be carried out. But they were also responsible for things like the cadets programme, junior fire setters, a range of discrete programmes intended to promote community fire safety.
Right. Now, some people...
Sorry, and just to say that within that department there was also what was known as the Resource Management Centre, which was a kind of, detailed technical thing, but a very important detailed technical thing. I think you'd have to ask Dave Brown when he comes to give you a better description of it than I will be able to manage today. But it was an important corner of that department.
Now, Dave Brown is the Assistant Commissioner, Dave Brown.
Yes. So he was Assistant Commissioner OPR when I was in post, and both his title and his rank changed subsequently. And he had, I think, during your time, the title Third Officer, did he? As well, yes.
I see. Now, you've described very helpfully to us, although in overall terms, different functions these different departments had. To the best of your knowledge and recollection, who decided which functions should be allocated to which of these departments under your directorate?
The Commissioner must be the answer to that. Right. So the authority itself approved the structure of the organisation, and if there were to be any significant changes to the structure, then that would have to be reported to members for approval. So they decided how many chief officers, how many directors we had, how many chief officers we had, and by chief officer, that I mean to include assistant commissioners. So the head of strategy and planning would be a chief officer, but so too would be the head of OPR, Operations, Prevention and Response, but he would also be sometimes known as an assistant commissioner and, unhelpfully, sometimes also known as the third officer. But in essence, they were, as it were, chief officers. Right. So the authority approved the structure in those terms based upon advice received from the Commissioner.
I mean, taking an example from what you've just told us, somebody decided that the PDA, the predetermined attendance team, should sit within the strategy and performance department's remit, but community safety, home fire visits, and the control room should fit in a different department, the operations prevention and response department. Are you able to tell us in very brief terms who made that decision? Or rather, what the logic was for that decision?
I think in the case of PDA, it will have. I'm torn between now wanting to say I don't know and offering you an answer, but
If you don't know, you don't know.
I don't know in the case of PDA. Then I've got some intelligent speculation about it, but that's all it is. In the case of community safety, it was in the period after I joined the brigade, but shortly after I joined the brigade, that brigades began to think a great deal more about community fire safety and about what activities they might undertake in order to promote community fire safety. And I think that was very much, as it were, grown in then Roy Bishop's directorate. So I think that's why it started there and it continued there. And there were good reasons for that. So, if the major bulk of community fire safety activity was home fire safety visits, they were going to be delivered by firefighters based at fire stations. So there was a natural synergy there. And things like the junior fire setters team, for example, that was very much associated with fire stations and firefighters. And so there was a very close affinity between community fire safety as a function, as it were, and fire stations.
I see. Did anybody during your time keep regular watch, or by way of monitoring, on the appropriateness of this structure, and whether or not it was appropriate to keep the structure as it was, or whether different functions should be moved? Was that regularly reviewed?
It wasn't frequently reviewed, but it was reviewed. So the structure when I joined in 2001 was a new structure, as I've already mentioned, with, as it were, a new arrangement of the building blocks. There were adjustments when I was appointed as Deputy Commissioner in 2009. So some of the departments which I was responsible as Deputy Commissioner had not previously been under Roy Bishop's command. And of course, there was a further restructuring as I left in 2015, which produced my redundancy. So those are three high-level examples of where, as it were, the building blocks were actively reviewed. But I'm sorry, I think there must have been another occasion as well. When I joined in 2001, I joined at the same time as another, as we were sometimes described, non-operational director who also happened to be a woman. So it was regarded as notable that two women had joined as directors, two non-operational women had joined as directors. And I can't remember the year in which Barbara herself was made redundant, I'm afraid. But that must, if she was made redundant, that was a result of, as it were, a reordering of the building blocks. And Barbara was Director of Resources and Sue was Director of Finance and Contractual Services. So there was definitely some rearrangement at some point, but I can't date it, I'm afraid. So,
what is Barbara's surname?
Barbara Riddle.
Oh, Riddle.
Yeah.
Now, looking at your witness statement, if we can, please, at page 4. Paragraph 10. You say there, under the Lacknell House Action Plan, in line 5, you say, where those heads of service reported to me, I sought to guarantee the delivery of various actions through management arrangements. I would routinely meet at least monthly with the heads of service who reported to me to discuss their wider activities and projects, which included the actions that had been assigned to them. And then you talk about the Lacknell House Board, which we'll come to later. Now, where you refer to heads of service, are those the heads of service for the departments that we've just outlined?
Yes.
And did any other heads of service report to you?
None in addition to those we've identified.
And were those meetings monthly?
Yes.
And were they formal or informal meetings?
I don't know the answer to that question. They were regular scheduled meetings.
They were regular and scheduled. They weren't just very well. Were they minuted?
No, they weren't minuted. No, they were one-to-one meetings between the head of service and myself.
To what extent were you involved in monitoring the heads of service work that they were undertaking?
To what extent?
Let me ask it a different way.
Well, no, to a significant extent. I was struggling about whether to say intimately, but that would imply I was excessively controlling, which some people might have thought I was. No, I was very involved in that.
Let me ask it slightly differently. I mean, you had these monthly meetings,
Yes.
which were not minuted, but was that the extent of your monitoring, or did you monitor, get involved in the business of those departments between those meetings?
It certainly wasn't the only way I monitored them. But I guess the other ways were indirect. So I'm sure we'll talk about the Lakanal House Action Plan, and I think it's likely that you'll at some point take me to comments I made on various drafts where I said, actually that's not clear enough, or will you put some numbers in here, please, or comments from me intended to improve the content of that plan. But I did that across a very wide range of documents. So all of the reports that went from my directorate to meetings of the authority or committees of the authority, of which there were many, hundreds and hundreds over the years, came via my desk. And I think it's fair to say I read them all and I commented on very many of them. Those reports would be produced at levels below me. So within the brigade, because of the nature of the organisation, you often found a position where one person or one department was responsible for the production of a particular report, but they would then have to involve 10 or 20 other people in contributing to that. So a good example of that would be the quarterly performance monitoring reports that went to the Governance, Performance and Audit Committee. So those reports would tell members how we were getting on with the delivery of key performance indicators as published in the London Safety Plan. And an advanced draft of that report would come to me and I would read it. And as a result of reading that, I would be able to go back to my heads of service and say, actually, those numbers are of concern to me. Why were there fewer fire safety inspections of high-risk premises in the last quarter than there were in the quarter before that? So that's an example, but there was a great deal of that. So I had, as it were, purchase on lots of aspects of the delivery of or the performance of those departments as a result of, for example, that kind of activity.
Right. Now, I just want to ask you about oversight and responsibility and your role as one of the three directors. There was, I think, something called the Corporate Management Team, or CMT, is that right?
It was CMB in my day, Corporate Management Board. I believe it subsequently became CMT, but it was definitely CMB while I was in post.
Do you know when the CMB was established?
Before my time, it existed when I joined.
Right. And during your time, in brief, what type of matters would the CMB discuss or oversee?
It would oversee monitoring of the authority's budget. It would review some of the more key reports that we intended to put to the authority. It would so the budget, key reports to members. If we had industrial disputes, and sadly we had numerous, it would receive reports about handling aspects of that. It would receive from time to time reports about some of our more major contracts. So, for example, the contract with Asset Co, as it was at one point, subsequently became Babcock, I think, but the contract for the provision of appliances to the Brigade. Similarly, it would receive reports about Babcock and the delivery of the training contract, as not all of the reports about that topic, but the reports that it was intended to present to members. It would, as a kind of set piece on an annual basis, review the health and safety statement for the Brigade, which was, I think, a statutory requirement. So there was some of the business was cyclical and in that sense predictable, and other items were in response to either events or priorities at that point in time.
Now, you refer to the CMB, not the CMT. Was there something called the Commissioners Group?
Yes.
Was that different from the CMB or the same?
It was different.
What was it?
CMB, I think, met on Wednesday mornings in a very formal way, and CMB was routinely also attended by a number of advisors. So, for example, the head of Legal and Democratic Services always attended CMB, but was not a member, as it were. The head of Strategy and Planning attended CMB. There were one or two, the head of Equalities attended CMB. And I'm sorry to go back a couple of stages on building blocks. I've just realised to my in a way that's putting me off slightly. I don't know why we didn't talk about the Equality Department. The Equality Department reported to me as Deputy Commissioner.
Okay.
So, sorry, to go back to your question about the Commissioners Group. The Commissioners Group was intended to be a more informal opportunity for the four most senior officers, and it became 5. So Dave Brown, as third officer, was added to the Commissioners Group for us to be able to meet more informally. So the Wednesday CMB meetings were more formal. Usually it was jolly helpful to have the advisors there, but sometimes we wanted to talk about things, without the advisors. We were the more senior officers, the 5 more senior officers, and sometimes we just wanted the opportunity to talk about things in a more informal way. Quite often they were to do with, City Hall politics. So it was a terribly difficult period in terms of the relationship with the Mayor and the relationship with City Hall, particularly where there were proposals around, for example, station closures. And it was just helpful sometimes to be able to meet and say, this is what the Mayor's thinking, or this is what one of the Mayor's advisors is thinking. It may or may not come to fruition. More informal things, maybe more ad hoc informal updates on the industrial relations position if we'd got ongoing disputes. So, maybe some feedback from what the employers' thoughts were about, where we were in the pensions dispute, for example. So just a more informal opportunity.
Right. Let me see if I can clear this up, because I think we've been led into confusion, or I have. Can I ask you please to look at Mr. Reason's witness statement at LFB 3032747. This is Gary Reason's witness statement. Page 3, please. Paragraph 7. And at paragraph 7, he says at the top of the page there, at the time of taking up the DOORT role, DIRT, perhaps I'll call it, role, the Brigade CMT was made up of the Commissioner, Ron Dobson, Deputy Commissioner, Rita Dexter, Director of Contractual Services, Sue Budden, and myself. The CMT was supplemented in 2013 by the appointment of a third officer, Assistant Commissioner Dave Brown, who at that time was responsible for managing all of the Brigade's fire stations. That's why I asked you about the CMT. Is Mr. Reason correct that there was such a thing called the CMT that he's referring to here and describing?
One of us is mistaken, and I think it's Gary. So I think it became CMT. And I know that Gary went back to the Brigade after Grenfell, and there was a CMT then. But I'm reasonably certain that in my time it was known as CMB.
So it's the same thing, but
yes,
called the CMB.
absolutely,
Right.
yes.
Now, just on the CMB then.
And just to, so that was the CMB, but CMB was also attended by advisors, and Gary hasn't made that point. So he hasn't mentioned, for example, that the head of Legal and Democratic Services was always in attendance, but that was not the case at the Commissioners' Group. So the Commissioners' Group is as described there.
Yes, that has cleared that up, I think, so thank you. Just to be a little clearer still, the CMB, as you've referred to it, you say met Wednesdays formally. Did it? Were there minutes taken of those meetings?
Yes.
There were, right. The Commissioners' Group, you say, was informal. Was that unminuted?
Yes. Tuesday mornings, unminuted, yes.
But it was also held regularly, Tuesday morning?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Now, in addition to your role on the CMB and within the Commissioners' Group, is it right that you were also a member of the Operational Directorates Coordination Board, or the ODCB?
I was the chair of ODCB
Were you always the chair of the ODCB?
once I became Deputy Commissioner.
Yes, I follow. Now, we're going to come on in a little while to explore the work of the ODCB in detail, but for the time being, is it right that the board, that board was comprised of the directors and heads of service of the LFB's two operational directorates, so yours and Gary Reason's?
Not in their entirety, no. So ODCB, I chaired ODCB as Deputy Commissioner. Gary Dobson and then Gary Reason in the same role, Director of ORT, attended. Sue Button as Director of Finance and Contractual Services came later, so I don't think Sue was attending ODCB as a standing member when I began to chair ODCB. I could be wrong about that, but I don't believe that to be the case. I think she was added subsequently. And then other members of ODCB certainly included all of the assistant commissioners because of their management role. So, the head of the assistant commissioner for example, operational planning attended because he was the head of operational planning, not because he was an AC. In fact, that role was always occupied by an AC, but the heads of the operational departments attended ODCB as standing members. Other heads of service did not attend ODCB. So the head of strategy and planning, for example, did not attend ODCB as a standing member. The head of legal and democratic services didn't. The head of IT didn't. So it wasn't all of the heads of service.
Some of them.
It was a defined group.
So, to be clear, assistant commissioners did attend, whether or not,
yes,
but where they were heads of service, but not all heads of service.
Correct. Yes.
Yes, I follow. You referred, I think, to strategy and planning. Did you mean strategy and performance, or is there something else like that?
No. The planning and performance changed over time. I can't date it, but yes, that would be S&P. Did not attend.
S&P could cover both.
Yes.
Right. Well, let's see how we go with the acronyms. But was the primary purpose of the ODCB to review the LFB's operational performance and training?
Yes, that would be one headline. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, well, I say headline. The primary purpose, the main.
Yes.
Now we're going to touch on your membership of the Lacknell House Board and then the Lacknell House Working Group later in your evidence. But just pausing on that point for the moment, is it right that the Lacknell House Board was set up following the Lacknell House fire in July 2009?
Yes.
And is it right that the purpose of that board was primarily to investigate the cause of the fire and the Brigade's response to it?
I can't remember whether your question included primarily again.
It did.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, there were other things as well, of course.
The follow-up action, yes.
Follow-up action.
Or the
yes.
consequential action, yes.
Yeah, we'll come to it later on in slower time, but just as a headline point, and also as a headline point at this early stage, Ms Dexter, is it right that the Lakenal House Working Group, or LHWG, was a body established by the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority, or LFEPA, in June 2013, following the Lakenal House Coroner's Rule 43 recommendations?
Yes, so the Lakenal House Working Group was a body of elected members, of whom there were 3,
Yes.
advised by officers.
Yes.
And although it wasn't a formal committee of LFEPA, it operated in the same way. That is, the members were the elected members and the officers were there as advisors.
Yes. And is it right that LFEPA formed part of the Greater London Authority?
Yes.
Yes. And it was, in effect, a political body charged with running the London Fire Brigade, the LFB?
Yes.
Yeah. And it didn't hold responsibility for running the daily working of the LFB?
No, but that's not to say it was unconcerned with, as it were, the daily running of the LFB insofar as it affected the objectives to improve safety for Londoners.
Indeed. And do you agree that the LFEPA or LFEPA held the LFB accountable through a number of boards and committees?
Committees, the Lakenal House Working Group was an exceptional thing. I don't think there were any boards, so certainly through committees and through the Lakenal House Working Group.
The reason I ask about committees is because we've come across 2, I think, by way of example, the LFEPA Governance, Performance and Audit Committee,
Yes.
and the LFEPA Strategy Committee.
Yes, they were. There were different committees earlier in my time in LFEPA, so the committee structure was capable of being revised annually if members wished it to be so. So I think when I joined it was a slightly different structure.
Right.
But certainly by the time I left that was the structure, yes.
Right. Were you a member of those 2 committees?
I'm sorry, there was probably also a finance committee. There weren't only those 2 committees. There was a finance committee and there will also have been provision for an urgency committee and an appointments committee.
Right. And those committees were, is this right, the way in which LFEPA oversaw LFB and held it to account?
Yes.
Yes. Were you a member of the 2 committees I mentioned, the Governance, Performance and Audit Committee and the Strategy Committee?
No, you were only a member of a committee if you were an elected member, i.e. a councillor or a member from the London Assembly, and if you attended as an officer, you were, as it were, in attendance.
I see. And you were one
Yes.
of those in attendance rather than a member. I follow. Now let's then turn to look, if we can, a little bit more closely, please, at the ODCB, the Operational Directorates Coordination Board. First, I think you've confirmed, but it's right, isn't it, that you chaired the ODCB during your time as Deputy Commissioner?
Yes.
Was it throughout that time?
Yes.
And the first meeting that you chaired, as we have it in our records, is the 2nd of March 2010. Is that something you remember? We have the minutes if you want to see them, but would that be about right?
It's certainly about right, yes.
Yes, we do have the minutes for that.
Sure.
They're, just for our reference, they're at LFB 3040607. We don't need to turn them up. And is it right also that Gary Reason, as Director of Operational Resilience and Training, chaired the ODCB in your absence?
Yes.
How often did the ODCB meet?
Probably 4 times a year.
And that was a formal occasion?
Yes.
Formally minuted?
Yes.
Yeah. Turning to its terms of reference, we find those at LFB 3032733. Can we just go to that, please? And we can look at Section 1, Summary Objective, under terms of reference, and I'll just read this to you. Within the Brigade's overall governance arrangements, the ODCB provides a formal and scheduled forum for the principal officers of the Deputy Commissioner's Directorate and Directorate of Operational Resilience and Training to consider A, intelligence from a number of sources about the Brigade's operational and training activities and determine the most appropriate response in terms of policy review and development. B, regular reports about dynamic and intelligent operational training, or DIOT, which enables the Brigade to identify positive and developmental trends from operational and training activities, which is used to help decide future training requirements and to assist in identifying any areas where the Brigade's operational performance needs to improve. And C, other cross-directorate policy issues. The board is in essence a policy forum relating to operational health and safety and training issues, and will not manage the actual delivery of policies and procedures, which is the responsibility of other bodies. Now, just focusing on that last sentence in particular, are we to take it that the clue of the function of the ODCB is actually in the name, namely a forum for the two operational directorates to coordinate their activity? Was that the crux of it?
Coordinate. Sorry, I'm thinking hard about whether coordination is the best way of thinking about it. But yes.
Yeah. And is it right that the ODCB meetings were attended by the vast majority of LFB's senior officers, save the Commissioner?
Well, except the heads of service that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
May I see page 2 of this document,
Yes, of
please?
course. Page 2 is where we're going next. We're going to go to
right.
Well, we're going to go on to section 4, which may help.
Okay.
Membership, deputies, frequency and administration. And then there's a list
Yes.
of the members.
Yes.
So that may help you.
Yes.
That list there, is that the vast majority of LFB's senior officers? They're a description rather than...
It leaves out 4 or 5 of important officers. So the head of finance isn't there, the head of S&P isn't there, the head of equalities isn't there, the head of legal isn't there. So as before, it was very much more focused on those with operational responsibilities. But the head of human resources and development was there principally because of the relationship with Babcock and training. The head of finance and contractual services, I've been struggling why it doesn't say director of finance and contractual services when I've reviewed this document, because Sue Budden was the director of finance and contractual services. But that was because part of the business of ODCB sometimes did encroach on issues to do with equipment, for example, appliances and equipment. And so, as it were, the function responsible for procurement and some of those contracts was there. Numerically, it's the majority of heads of service, but it's certainly not all of them.
Now, you said something a moment ago that I'm interested in. You said the head of finance isn't there. The head of S&P isn't there.
No.
By S&P, do you mean strategy and performance or
Yes.
strategy and planning?
That title changed at some point, but I can't date it. So I can't remember whether it was first head of strategy and planning or first head of strategy and performance, and then it changed to the other. But it's the same role.
The same role, and it's sat within your directorate.
Yes, but that head did not attend ODCB.
Why is that?
Because this was largely focused on, as it were, operational performance and improvement. So there wasn't a strong case for the holder of that role to attend ODCB.
Who made that? Who decided that there wasn't such a strong case for that head to be there?
I must have inherited it, so I don't remember making an active decision about it.
Right. Did it ever strike you as odd that the head of S&P was not routinely, or ever actually, as it looks from this, at ODCB meetings?
No.
Didn't?
No.
Why is that?
Because there was nothing about the business of ODCB that in the context of the business of ODCB, I can't remember an occasion where I thought, oh, actually, it would have been really helpful if we'd had that person in attendance.
Right.
So, but it doesn't say it here, but the head of information management, who reported to the head of SMP, regularly attended, as it were by invitation, but regularly attended, in order to provide updates on issues that were of relevance to operational performance. For example, to provide an update on what was happening with mobile data terminals. So there were often information management specific issues that arose at ODCB, or which ODCB needed to receive an update about. And so that head, who wasn't a head of service, but head of information management division, he attended from time to time to provide those updates.
Right. We may come back to that in due course. Just staying with this page, you'll notice in the last bullet point there that Babcock International was a member on a 4-monthly basis. Does that mean they only attended ODCB meetings every 4 months?
Yes, they attended when we took the IMPD reports, as they're referred to, because the IMPD reports were the vehicle. So the IMPD reports are part of DIOT, and we'll explore all of this, I'm sure, but the IMPD reports were the main vehicle for determining issues that we were going to take forward through operational news and or training and or policy adjustments.
Right.
So there was a direct need for Babcock to be in attendance for those items. I mean, before the contract was, before the function was externalised, the Assistant Commissioner training would have been in attendance, and as it were, covered that off. But once we ceased to have an Assistant Commissioner training, we needed to, Babcock needed to be in attendance to, as it were, fulfil the function previously undertaken by what had been the Assistant Commissioner training.
Yes. Now, we know that the frequency of attendance of Babcock at the ODCB meetings decreased from, 3 times a year, as it would have been, to once every 6 months.
When did that happen?
I was about to ask you that.
Oh,
Do you remember that?
no.
You don't? Right. Do you know, would it follow that since you don't remember when it happened, you don't know why it happened?
No. I mean, I'm assuming you're saying that because you've got some minutes and you can see when it happened, but no, I don't recall that.
Does it help you to know that the IMPD reporting changed, we think in 2012, to every 6 months? First, is that correct, factually?
I don't know. I'd have to review the agenda and minutes.
Is it right to say? Or fair?
Sorry. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Is it fair to say that the ODCB was particularly focused on operational information and feedback?
Yes.
In other words, operations in the field rather than internally.
I'm not sure of the distinction you're driving at.
All right, we'll come back to that then, perhaps later. Can we stick with this document and go back, please, to page 1 and go to page 2? The bottom of page 1, you can see the agenda set out. Part 1, standard business terms. And you have quarterly meetings, 6 monthly meetings, if we go to page 2, which would include the IMPD 6 monthly update and interim meetings as well, between the quarterly and 6 monthly meetings. Now, if we go on to part 2, it says here, part 2, strategic direction issues, which include policy issues affecting both directorates, the agreement of changes to strategies and policies relating to health and safety, operational staff training and development, senior operational officer training and the prioritisation of non-core operational training needs. Other examples of strategic direction issues include the final agreement of operational elements of selection processes and the annual Babcock training delivery plan. Decisions arising from this part of the agenda will, as appropriate, be referred to other departments / bodies for action or information, e.g. Corporate Management Board, that's the CMB, I think, Heads of Service Group. Now, first, is it right that the ODCB was expected to be at the heart of any substantive policy revisions? You get that from the first line and second line there. Changes to strategies and policies.
Yes. Can I just say, I don't have any first-hand recollection of this document, so it's dated October 2013. I asked to see the second page earlier because I'm conscious that in reviewing evidence before today, I've seen different versions of the terms of reference and membership of ODCB, and I've definitely picked up some errors in those, which I've reported back to my legal team. But this, I just have a slight reservation about this document. I don't know. I have no visual recollection of it, but it refers to approval of the annual Babcock training delivery plan.
Yes.
And I'm fairly certain we never did that because we didn't. I think the annual Babcock training delivery plan went to CMB. And sorry, we had that discussion earlier about CMB, CMT. It's interesting, this does refer to the Corporate Management Board, not the Corporate Management Team. But I'm just a bit anxious about the provenance of this document. I'm sorry, I just need to say that because there are some things about it that just strike me. I mentioned earlier the head of Finance and Contractual Services as against the Director of Finance and Contractual Services. So there are just some small details in it that make me troubled about it. I think it's broadly absolutely spot on, but I just do have some reservations about its provenance.
Well, I was going to ask you, as my next question, what was the annual Babcock training delivery plan? But I think your answer is this right? It didn't exist.
Oh no, I think it did exist, but I don't think it came to ODCB. I think it came to CMB. I'm fairly certain. I've seen a copy of a CMB report about plans with Babcock during the preparation of my evidence, and I'm pretty sure I identified that one of the appendices referred to in that CMB report was the draft annual plan, and as it happens, it was omitted from the bundle that I got, but I noticed it, I registered it wasn't there, and that suggests to me that the Babcock training delivery plan went to CMB rather than to ODCB.
Right. Who was responsible for drafting this document?
I don't know, Mr. Millett.
Could you tell us what was the annual Babcock training delivery plan?
I think the plan was produced within Gary Reason's command, and Gary will be much better equipped to give you an accurate description of the delivery plan.
Well, you say it came to the CMB.
Indeed.
Did you were on the CMB?
I was.
Presumably, being on the CMB, you got to see the annual Babcock training delivery plan.
Yes, that's it.
So what was it?
It was a plan that set out intentions for the coming year in terms of the intended delivery programme of training within the organisation.
And what role did the CMB have in relation to that plan?
To scrutinise it and approve it. I can't, as a matter of fact, remember whether it was then referred to the relevant committee of the authority for approval as well. So certainly a committee of the authority received, I think, quarterly reports on the progress of the delivery of the plan. You know, members were told how many courses of what type had been provided and how many people were in attendance and what the feedback was and a whole range of matters. But as a matter of fact, I simply can't recall whether the plan went from CMB to a committee of the authority.
As a member of the CMB, scrutinising and approving the annual Babcock Training Delivery Plan, what did the CMB scrutinise it against? What tools did it use to examine that annual plan and decide whether or not to approve it?
The tools it used were the experience and knowledge of the members of CMB. So there was no, as it were, paper-based checklist. Check if this is in the plan or that is in the plan, or enough of this is in the plan or enough of that is in the plan. If there was that kind of process, that would have been happening long before it got to CMB. But as members of CMB, we were repositories of knowledge about the organisation and about issues that needed to be covered by training activity, but the detailed building blocks of that were the product of the kind of processes that were described in Peter Groves's document, How Training Works. So, as it were, the heavy lifting of the detail happened in well-established processes before the plan got to CMB. But the training plan wasn't, as it were, going to a group of strangers who had no ability to assess whether it was a good plan or a completely bonkers plan. As members of CMB, we all had functional responsibilities that we were discharging on an ongoing basis, which gave us, I believe, sufficient competence to form a view about whether the training plan was the training plan that we wanted for the organisation in the year ahead.
How would you know, from your own experience, as one of the members of the CMB approving that plan, whether anything was important was missing?
Well, I think I think you've already heard that the training team, as I will call them, I'm sure they've got a more complicated title, but the training team worked with heads of service and many others to, as it were, gather up intelligence about what those heads of service believed to be necessary in the coming year. And if what those heads of service had asked for, as it were, didn't find its way into the training plan, then I'm certain that, in my case, it would have been raised with me. So if, for example, Steve Turek, as head of fire safety regulation at that time, had told the training team that he wanted a new course for fire safety inspecting officers and he wanted 100 places to be provided over a specified period of time, if that hadn't materialised in the final plan, Steve would have come to me and said, look, I asked for this and I haven't got it. And I don't want to make CMB sound like a bartering process. It genuinely wasn't like that. But there were mechanisms for, or there were opportunities for heads of service to come to their line manager and say, look, I think this is really important and it's not in the plan or it's not the right priority. So there were corporate processes for assembling a plan which met the priorities that heads of service had discussed with the training team and which prioritised them. And I don't recall it, but I think it's likely that the plan set out some explanation of the priorities and, the way they had been determined.
What involvement, if any involvement, did the ODCB have in the assessment or agreement of the Babcock annual training delivery plan?
I don't think we did have any involvement in it.
Now, can I take you to your statement, please, your first statement, LFB 3032733, page 2. Sorry, it's the document we're on. It's not your statement. It's this reference, terms of reference. If we just go to the last part of what I've just been reading to you, where it says decisions arising from this part of the agenda will, as appropriate, be referred to other departments, stroke bodies for action or information. For example, Corporate Management Board, Heads of Service Group. Were any of the ODCB's directions or recommendations mandatory?
No. Sorry. I shouldn't have answered that so quickly. I don't think that's a question we ever asked or answered.
Right. Did the ODCB ever follow up on these referrals?
Yes. So part of the DIOT process, as part of that process, we take a report from the operational assurance team, which provided us with information about their observations based on their work as ORT or audits or PRCs or PROs, and there's a list of contributing processes that resulted in the reports to ODCB from operational assurance. So we would take those reports. I can't think of any occasion where we rejected the recommendations of the operational assurance team about what to take forward as policy or training. That may have happened, but I don't recall any examples of it. Both in the olden days, the AC training would take that away, and the AC ops procedures would take that away. And at the next meeting, they would report back on the action they had taken in order to take forward the matters that we had decided at the previous meeting.
Can we go back to the first page of this document? And let's look together at section 2, sources of intelligence. And it says there, underneath that, regular reports, and there are 5, senior accident investigations, SAI, mobile data terminals, IMPD, DIOT, and Babcock International. And then underneath that, as required, and there are some more, audits of operational professionalism, training audits, fire service circulars and other national guidance, changes in legislation, fire investigation, FI reports, fatal fire reviews. Now, we'll come on later to look at some of those sources in more detail, but I'd like to start, if I can, with D under regular reports, DIOT or DIOT. I think Mr. Graves called it DIOT yesterday. How was it referred to, as far as you know?
DIOT and DIOT.
Right, okay. Well, dynamic and intelligent operational training. Am I right in saying that, I call it DIOT, is a process, not an entity or a department?
Yes, so it's a policy and a process. So
right.
It is a policy. Yes.
Right. Now, if we look at your first witness statement, please, at LFB 32363, please, page 5. I just want to look at paragraph 17 there, just to remind you what you say. You say there, and I'm summarising, that the delivery of the objectives of DIOT was the responsibility of the ODCB. Would it be fair to say that, in fact, that the ODCB's work was centred around the DIOT process?
Yes, but not to the, but not all-consuming, and not to the exclusion of other important matters. We've referred to, or I've referred to, mobile data terminals and the need for ODCB to be advised as to progress with our objectives for mobile data terminals. But sometimes important standalone policies or proposed new policies also came to ODCB. So yes, your point is correct, but I wouldn't want you to think that it was the only thing.
No, well, perhaps the fourth layer in my question, but is it right to say that the delivery of the DOT objectives was the main responsibility of the ADC board?
Yes.
Can we then look at paragraph 16? And in the third line there, you say, and to be fair to you, you are quoting from the DOT policy, LFB 825. You say in the fourth line, the DOT process monitors operational health and safety and training performance and identifies positive and developmental trends and provides mechanisms including training developed both internally and externally to support the maintenance of competency for all operational staff. Without wishing to be rude, what does that mean in real life?
You see, I'm reading it, and it makes sort of perfect sense to me, which shows something about my incorporation into the work of London Fire Brigade, I guess.
Is it? I mean, maybe to try and help. Does it simply mean learning from mistakes in fighting fires?
Well, certainly learning from mistakes, but also learning good things. I think one of the things that the Operational Assurance Department were trying to do was also to promote good practice, not just, as it were, deficient practice. But yes, that wouldn't be a very unfair summary. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, we haven't been at this evidence in this module for very long, but people watching it might wonder why the LFB got itself into a position where it had a sort of juggernaut-like of grand structures and nomenclature and initials, which is quite difficult to penetrate from the outside. My question is, did it ever occur to you that the structure within which you were working was clunky and difficult to manage, where lines of communication didn't work very well, and you got enmeshed in it all?
No. London Fire Brigade is a complicated organisation, often necessarily so, possibly sometimes unnecessarily so, but many people in London Fire Brigade are doing difficult, intricate things, and you've seen an abundance of that in the inquiry, and have had already quite a lot to say about it, and doubtless will have a lot more to say about it. But from my own perspective, when I joined London Fire Brigade, my local government friends thought, why are you doing that? It's a fire brigade. They just send fire engines out to fight fires. Well, it's not like that. It's a more complicated, interesting and difficult organisation, and things fit together internally in ways that just are much more complicated. But I think that I am inclined to be vigorous about where things have been overcomplicated. I think, my statement could have been enormously more complicated if I'd still been within London Fire Brigade when I'd prepared it, but I think it's reasonably plain. And so my point is that if I didn't lose any of my old skills when I joined London Fire Brigade, and if I came across things that were ridiculously complicated because that's how they did things, then I would have sought to change them. So no. I think it does have problems with vocabulary and acronyms, and some of it's irritating, but more of it is necessary than not, I feel.
Thank you. Well, let's see how we go with that answer, because it may be that as we go, we might find instances. But going back to DOT, did the DOT process operate like this? Tell me if this is oversimplifying it, Ms. Dexter. That the ODCB would receive reports, good or bad, from incidents or training events, and then consider whether new training or policies were required?
Rarely from individual incidents, but from analysis of individual incidents. So that's what the operational assurance team would do.
Yes.
They would, gather intelligence about hundreds of incidents in each reporting period. I've lost focus on the question, Mr. Millett, I'm sorry.
No, I think that answered it. Thank
Okay.
you. Is it right that the ODCB's primary output as a result of the DIOT process was LFB's operational news, the newsletter?
Well, operational news plus what went with it. Either the
Indeed.
amendments to policies and or the amendments to training.
Yes. And just focusing on the newsletter, operational news, is this right, was published quarterly, but then became, I think, is it right, biennial? Biannual, rather.
I don't think I can speak to frequency, Mr. Millett. Somewhere between quarterly and 6 monthly, yes. It'll be a matter of fact.
What purpose did operational news serve?
To communicate in a more straightforward way for the benefit of those on fire stations, the findings of the operational assurance processes, and to provide stations with information about how the brigade intended to respond. But some things were not. Some of the things that were in operational news were not the product of DIOT. So operational news. Sometimes there was an operational news special. So I think there's one about the Olympics, for example. But it also, from time to time, contained information about, for example, new equipment. So there wouldn't have been a need for the new equipment to be part of DIOT, but we might want crews to know that there was new items of equipment, and sometimes that would be communicated via operational news.
Right. Were you aware of other publications? We've identified two, I think, Shout and Update.
You've failed to identify Safety Matters, which was another.
Oh, right.
Shout might have been Shout might have been early in my tenure in the Brigade. In common with everywhere that I've worked, from time to time there are reviews of the communications machinery and discussions about what works better and what works not at all. And so over time, we took a view about the range of publications and their target audiences and their intended purpose. So I think while I was Deputy Commissioner, we certainly merged Safety Matters and operational news because of the overlap in content.
Yeah.
But the relationship with Shout and Update, I just can't remember, I'm afraid.
No. And did operational news go to the operational directorates, the staff or senior staff in the operational directorates, as opposed to station-based firefighters?
Oh, both.
Both did it.
Yeah, it was freely available to all.
Right.
So its main target audience was station-based staff, but it was freely available throughout the whole of the organisation,
Was
and
it?
that distinction didn't exist. Yeah.
Right. And what about Update?
I don't remember Update, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
Right. Now, let's look at the DIOT policy, which is at LFB 30055171. And I'll just show you this. We seem to have a blank on the evidence. No, we don't. Thank you. It's come back. Very good. No, well, there it is. And it's dated the 11th of April 2013, policy 825. And if we turn, please, to page 2, let's look together at paragraph 1.2, which says the authority has a statutory duty to ensure that all operational staff are trained to undertake their role effectively and safely. Training requirements for operational staff include a number of generic core risk critical skills that all staff must develop and maintain to work effectively in teams and with the communities they serve. These core skills are detailed in policy number 427, the development and maintenance of operational professionalism, or DAMOP. Now, would you agree that those two principles, identifying risks to operational staff and seeking to provide training, were central to the function of the DIOT policy and process and the ODCB?
I'm sorry, would you ask that again?
Will you see? I've shown you paragraph 1.2.
Yes.
Let me look at 1.5 with you. The DIOT process enables the effective identification and response to risk critical issues that have the potential to affect, I think that should be affect, operational staff. Looking at that, taken together with 1.2, would you agree that those two principles, risks to operational staff and providing training accordingly, were central to the DIOT policy?
Yes.
And central to the extent that it was covering DIOT to the ODCB's functions?
Yes.
Yes. Now, on page 2, while we're on it, can we look at paragraph 2.2 under background? The various stages of the process can be grouped into the following 5 main steps. And there they are. And I'll read them to you because we're going to look at each step in detail as we go through your evidence. 1, gathering and recording. 2, deciding. 3, acting, application. 4, evaluating. And 5, feedback. Now, as I say, I want to explore each of those in turn, starting with step 1, gathering and recording. That step is summarised on page 4 of this policy. If we go to that, please. We find it on paragraph 3.1, which says, a significant amount of data is used to drive the DIOT process and allow the identification of initiatives and revised training practices, which are necessary to bring about performance improvements. During the gathering and recording phase, a number of processes and electronic systems are used to gather and record information relating to the performance of individuals, teams, and the organisation. These include, and then there's a list, and the first on the list is the Incident Monitoring Process, or IMP. And if you just bear with me, look down then at the next paragraph, paragraph 3.2 of the policy. It says this: the IMP is a computer-based database that provides a means to record and identify both positive and developmental trends arising from operational and training events. Information is recorded against a range of defined criteria that describe individual and team performance. The database also allows staff to capture information relating to the use and application of operational training, equipment and procedures, as well as liaison with other agencies such as the London Ambulance Service and the Metropolitan Police. Now, first, is it correct that the information in the IMP database formed the basis for a number of reports that were received by the ODCB?
Yes.
And the database, which I think is called the IMPD, you've referred to it before, was actually central to the ODCB's analysis of the LFB's operational performance. Is that right?
Yes, it was central, but not exclusively so, yes.
No. Who was responsible for recording information on the IMPD, the Incident Monitoring Process database?
A range of people might create records in IMP, in the Incident Monitoring Process database. Following some, but not all, I think, incidents, one and or two things would happen. First of all, there might be a performance review of operations, and secondly, there might be a performance review of command. Now Dave Brown and or Gary Reason will be able to speak with much more authority about these two things. than I am able to. So my insight into the detail of PROs and PRCs is limited. So I did, from time to time, attend both to learn more about what happened.
Right.
But PROs and PRCs would generate, I can't remember whether they were described as action points or development points. We were always trying to be careful about vocabulary and not avoidably impute failure. But it would there would be, as it were, a post-mortem of what happened at the incident. And in turn, that would generate action points to be taken. So the incident commander might say to firefighter blogs, you know, you did that really well, and whatever that was might be recorded on the database. But the incident commander might equally say to firefighter blogs, actually, you know, it might be a good idea if you went back and looked at this case study or this item of training, or you got some more experience of, A or B. So for the individuals involved in the incident, there would be a range of observations, good or bad, and that would be true both of PROs and PRCs, and they would be available on the database for the Operational Assurance Department to review.
Can you just help me with this? While listening to your answer, I've been reading some of the paragraphs here, and it prompts me to ask, who is this written for? Who is the target audience, so to speak?
Well, it was an internal document. I think it was created in 2006 from memory, and I think it was created in response to what I would call the Bethnal Green fire, in which 2 firefighters died. And so following that event and the Rule 43 from that event, there was a whole-scale rethink about how lessons from incidents were learned. And diet was introduced, I think, in 2006. Did Mr. Millett say this was the 2013 version? But it will also have been written with, as it were, external readers in mind. So the Health and Safety Executive, I think, would be likely to expect a fire brigade to have a written policy of this nature. And for external inspection processes, for example, we always knew that the inspectors would want to see our policy on this, that or the other. So they were written principally for internal processes, but the process of codification of policies and processes was undoubtedly also important for demonstration of conscientious application of, in this case, the desire to learn to external organisations.
So to demonstrate someone had thought about these things?
Yes, yes.
Right. Yes, thank you very much.
Can we then look at paragraph 3.3, which I think enlarges on your answer earlier a little bit more. Entries on the IMP should be the result of exception reporting only, i.e. where performance of an individual, team, piece of equipment or organisational issue has either fallen below the required standard or has exceeded expectations. Monitoring officers must submit entries even if there are no exceptions to report, quotes unquotes. The IMP database automatically prompts monitoring officers who attended an incident to submit an entry on the IMP every 7 days until a submission is made. And then I'll just look at the next 3 sub-paragraphs of the policy. All comments on the IMP should be discussed with the recipient prior to recording. This does not mean the author requires the recipient's agreement to enter a comment, but ensures an open, transparent and fair process. Once submitted, each entry is verified and processed by the Incident Management Policy Group. Verified comments relating to the actions of specific individuals are automatically emailed to them and their line manager, station manager and above, as confirmation. In addition, the IMP comment is automatically added as an observation within the individual's personal development plan, PDP. Now, it's called exception reporting, or falling below the required standard. How is that defined? Was there an objective yardstick by which a decision was made to report? or when a particular individual or piece of equipment fell below the required standard?
I don't know whether there was guidance for those conducting PROs or PRCs on that matter. It's possible that there was, but I simply don't know, I'm afraid.
Okay. And now, other than for monitoring officers, is it right, I think, that the IMP was voluntary?
Well, this says not, doesn't it? Because it asks for nil returns.
Well, indeed.
Oh, no exceptions to report. Sorry, what was your question?
Well, my question is, other than for monitoring officers, for whom IMP entries were mandatory, but is it right that the IMP system was voluntary?
Not quite. I don't know if you're going to go to mandatory as an alternative. No, there were criteria for when a PRO or a PRC should be conducted, and there would be an expectation in relation to those that were conducted that, as it were, outputs should appear in the database.
During your time as Deputy Commissioner, would you agree that its take-up, the use of the IMP system, was poor?
It certainly was poor initially. I believe it got better. Certainly not to the level that we ideally would want. But the operational assurance team would report to ODCB what the take-up was. Would tell us what the take-up was, and at least 2 things would happen as a result of that, possibly more. But one of the 2 things was to communicate back to station-based staff via operational news that this was not intended to be a punitive thing, which is what was reported as the fear about it, that you might get in trouble if you admitted a fault or a failure. So there were issues to be dealt with where we tried to provide reassurance, and I'm sure you'll have seen that in operational news from time to time there were articles about what the purpose of this process was, that it was intended to be an organisational and individual improvement process. And so we tried very hard to provide reassurance about that in order to improve the take-up. So that's one of the 2 things that happened. A second thing that will certainly have happened is that Dave Brown, through his management processes, will have tracked that down to lower levels and will have been talking to the Deputy Assistant Commissioners, for example, about the need to encourage or require more use. It feels likely to me that it was probably on an agenda for borough commanders' meetings, although I don't know that for sure. But we took a range of actions to try and encourage more use of the database.
Right.
But there was a level of anxiety about what it meant to record a failure, as it were.
Let's break up that answer into some constituent parts. First, by looking at an IMPD report from September 2014, so only a few months before you left the LFB. It's at LFB 30678840. And I want to go to page 5 in that document. IMPD trend analysis reports Q4 and Q1, January 2014 to June 2014. And as I say, this document is dated September. Take that from me. And here you can see on page 5 a grey pie chart which contains details showing that out of 47,105 total incidents attended by the LFB, 1 or more IMP reports were made in 1,679 cases. Now that's only 4%, as a matter of arithmetic, of the overall number of the incidents attended, isn't it?
Yes.
So that means, doesn't it, that some 96%, the vast majority of LFB incidents during that period, had no IMP report at all?
Yes. If would you mind putting the whole page back into view,
Of course,
please. Thank you.
you're quite right. Let's just look at that.
Yes,
Can we have-
those numbers are correct. But can I also point you to the introduction, which says the data sets and narratives continues to suggest a growing positive improvement in the use of the system. The number of entries has again risen, so has the quality and the number of positive comments. So I think it's important to draw that out. But the incidents attended, overwhelmingly the incidents attended by London Fire Brigade result in not very much action, if any at all. So if this is incidents attended, this will include incidents where appliances arrived and immediately returned, for example, because the incident was, as it were, over, but it's still an incident in Fire Brigade recording terms. So I can't remember what follows, whether this analysis goes more to a more refined version of incidents. But you're right about the numbers, Mr. Millett. But I would say, we were very keen to encourage more take up, and you see that referred to in the introduction.
I mean, I haven't actually got to asking a question, but you drew attention to the positive first paragraph on that page. Whatever the improvement might have been, it was starting from, at least arithmetically,
yes,
a very low base.
I don't disagree with you.
No.
Yes.
Now, and if you look at the split of the incidents, you've got fires representing some 45%. So, of those incidents, they were actual fires, weren't they?
Well, they were mobilised. I suspect they were mobilised to a fire.
Well, well, let me ask you this.
It might be a fire that was out by the time they got there, and there was, what I don't know from this is those incidents where, for example, no firefighting action was required. So I'm just being cautious, appropriately, I think, based on experience, about what the big numbers tell you that is of very much use to you in this context. But I'm not disagreeing with your basic proposition that it was hard to encourage contributions to this, and it is likely to be the case, and that the overwhelming majority of incidents captured by that 47,000 headline involved nothing of significance to report. It's not because there were. I don't believe it is because there were lots of very important things that were happening that people were avoiding reporting. There might have been, some instances of that in some incidents, but, the 47,000 headline number is maybe creating the wrong impression here.
Well, let's just look at page 1 of this document. This pie chart forms part of an incident monitoring 6 monthly report.
Yeah.
And presented to an ODCB meeting in September 2014 by DAC Graham Ellis from Operational Assurance. Can we take it that the ODCB, of which you were a member, would have seen or did see this document?
Yes.
So you would have seen this document?
Yes.
Did you ever ask the question, how is it the case that 96% of incidents have returned no IMP at all?
I don't believe I did ask that question, Mr. Millett, for the reasons I've just explained. Because we would not have been looking for IMP contributions on the 47,000 incidents. B, because we knew that there was an issue to be worked on in terms of improvement, and we were working on it. So, no, I didn't ask that question, no.
No.
Or I don't, to the best of my memory, I didn't ask that question in September 2014, no. I received this report in a context of some knowledge about what we were trying to do with IMPD and how we were doing. So it wasn't the first or only report that I received, as it were. I had some understanding of, what was beyond that page, as it were, and those numbers.
Yes. And presumably you'd seen earlier reports of this nature.
Yes.
Did nobody at any time ever grapple with the statistics that on their face this document shows you?
Well, we grappled with the issue, for sure. So, the important thing was the issue, and, they're not very, that's not a very refined statistic. So the 47,000 number. But I'm confident it didn't obscure my understanding or the understanding of my colleagues about what was happening. We were really clear that we wanted more take-up in the use of IMPD, and I hope you'll find data that demonstrates that was successful.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's a reasonably convenient moment, given that it is 1 o'clock.
Well, if it's reasonably convenient, I think that's...
We will be returning to this topic immediately after the break, then.
Yes. Well, Ms. Dexter, we're going to have a break now so we can all get some lunch. We'll resume, please, at 2 o'clock. And as with all other witnesses, I must ask you, please, not to discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone at all while you're out of the room. All right? Thank you very much. Would you like to go with the usher then, please? She's just behind you. Thank you. 2 o'clock then, please. Thank you.